Let us move ahead with the next data type, that are lists. What are lists? Lists are the same as arrays with one exception, that they can have different data items inside them. Arrays would only have a particular data item within them. So for example, if an array had an integer, it would only have integer values. If it was a floating point, it would only have floating values. Lists are not like that. It can have integers, floats, complex numbers, strings, lists, tuples, dictionaries. There can be so many other different data types that a list can hold. And lists are also mutable, meaning that you can change particular items in the list. Now, for any of you who do not know what arrays are basically used to construct data structures. Now, what are data structures? Data structures are basically the way in which you arrange your data. For example, at home, you have a bookshelf where you want to arrange the books in a certain way that is comfortable for you. That makes it much more easier for you to work with. Now, that's the same case with data. Data also has to be stored in a particular manner so that it is much more helpful for you to work with. That's the reason arrays are used to make up stacks and queues and so many other data structures that you have. This is where arrays are used. Let us go ahead and understand lists much more clearer with the operations that I already have prepared for you guys. Let me go back to the presentation mode. So, how do you initialize empty lists? It is using square braces. Square braces are used to denote a list, or you can do that using the list function. So let me run the program and you can see the code over here. So as you can see, I have empty lists over here. So that is really simple for you guys to understand. How do you initialize a list? You just add data in that particular way. Using the square braces, you just have element, comma accordingly. But if you are using the list function, you have to make sure that you pass it as a single parameter, because if you don't, this will throw an error to you. So let me go ahead and run this program. So as you can see, this is the data that I have in my lists. Let me go ahead and comment all of this. And we have accessing the elements of the list. So how do you access the elements in your list? That is basically done using indexes. Now, it is really important for you to understand what index is. Index is basically the address in which the data is stored. This may be true for lists, tuples, and even for strings. So let me show you how the address is stored in Python. So if I have the element 1, it is stored at the index 0. If I have the element 2, it is stored at the index 1. So the address always starts with 0 up till how many ever numbers you have. So this will be 2, this will be 3, and this will be 4. So the address of element 1 is 0, address of element 2 is 1, and so on. There is also something which is called as the negative indexing in Python, which can help you to access data from the last or the bottom part of the list. So how is that? It starts from -1. So this will be -2, sorry. This will be -3. This will be -4. And this will be -5. So I hope you've understood what index is. Let me go ahead and just take out all of this. Yes. So now, how do you access the elements of the list? It is done using splicing. So basically what this means is that you want to particularly print certain parts of the list or string or tuple. There is something called as the starting index, stopping index, and the skip index. Here I have not given anything. So Python assumes that I want to print everything. So let me just print out the program for you. Yes. So as you can see over here, I am just saying that print of my list. So these are the different methods of how you can access the elements of your string. It's done using splicing. So splicing always has a starting index, it has an ending index, and it also has a skip index. So over here, I have not given the starting and the ending index. What this means is that Python will automatically think that I want to print all of the data. That is the reason I have all the data that is being printed over here. If I do not pass this, it will still give me the whole list that I have. So let me just run this again. As you can see, it is printing the whole list. So if I want to access a particular element, I have to pass the index value of it. So if this was 0, this was 1, this was 2, and this was 3, right? I am basically going to print Edureka, and that is what is being printed over here. Now it is with the starting index and the ending index, meaning that you have to start from the index 0 and go up to index 3, and you have to exclude index 4. So that is what happens over here. So it is 1, 2, 3 and Edureka. That means that I start from index 0, go up till 3, and I skip 4. If I want to reverse it, I do not give any starting or ending index. I just do it from -1. So the list is being reversed over here. So that's what happens over here, as you can see. Next is something called as the skip index, right? Now I start from 0, go up till 5 and skip 2 elements, meaning that I print 1, I skip 1 and I skip 2 and I print 3. I skip 3, I skip Edureka and I print Python. So that is what happens over here. As you can see, that is how you have obtained the output. Next is the third element and the second next. The next is I can also access particular elements within the elements. So basically what I am saying over here is that I want to print U. How do I do that? I know that Edureka is at index 3 and I also know that U is at the index 2. So I just add that over here. So I have 3 and 2, and that's the reason I have U that is being printed over here. So I hope you have understood what is indexing and how you can access the elements using splicing and indexing. Let us move ahead and add data into the list. How do you do that? You do that using the append function, the extend function, and the insert function. So let me just go ahead and show this to you, how it is being done. Now, so the append function adds the element at the end of the list. The extend function also adds the element at the end of the list. So what is the difference between them? Well, the difference between them is that the append function adds it as a particular element. It adds it as a single element. The extend function does not work like that. It adds all the elements one by one, whereas the append function just adds it as a single element. That's the reason if you go over here, you can see that 555 and 12, which is being passed actually as a list, is added as a list itself. So I have 1, 2, 3, Edureka, Python, and I have 555 and 12. But whereas in the extend function, I have 555 and 12 independently, and that's the reason I have 7 as the length of the list. The length of the list is basically to show how many elements are there in the list. And then I have the insert function, which takes the index at which I want to insert the particular data. That's the reason over here, if you can see, I have one insert example, and accordingly, the data is not deleted when you use the insert function. The next ways are to use the concatenation and multiplication, but they do not affect the actual data of the list. As you can see over here, I just have printing of my list. But if I was not printing it, it would actually change the data of it. But since I am using it in the print function, the data will not be changed. So as you can see over here, I have one accordingly, and just for example, and then multiplication is multiplying the list accordingly to the number you have told it to be multiplied with. So the whole list will be multiplied 2 times. And then just to show you that if I am printing all of this, it does not change the actual data. I have printed my list, and you can see that my list is unaffected. So that is basically how you can add elements. Now let's move ahead and see how we can delete elements from the lists. Let me go ahead and run the program. As you can see, I have 2 lists, and I have extended my list using 555, 12, and example. One way of deleting is by deleting it using the del keyword. I just say delete and pass the element that I want to delete, and it will be deleted. The next one is using the remove function. So I just pass the element that has to be removed from the list, and accordingly that will be removed. So that's the reason here, as you can see, 555 was deleted using the del keyword, and example was removed using the dot remove function. The next is the pop function. The pop function and the delete function are basically doing the same thing with one exception. The delete keyword does not return anything, whereas the pop function returns the value back to you. So you can use it accordingly to how you want. So I'm just saying that pop the element which is at index 5. That's the reason the popped element over here is 12, and the remaining list is 453.142, fun and cool. And then the last function is the clear function, which returns an empty list. So I hope you've understood what are the different ways that you can delete the data from your lists. Let's move ahead to just see the different other functions that are there in Python. If you remember, the length function is used to return the length of the function, and that is the reason we have obtained 5 over here. The next is the index function, which is used to return the index where this particular element exists. And this element exists at 3. That's the reason we have 3 at the output over here. Then we have the count, which basically tells that I want the count of Edureka, which is being repeated in this particular list. So in our example, it is repeated just once. So that's the reason we will only get it as 1 over here. So now we have the sorted and the sort function. The sorted has a return type, whereas the sort function does not have a return type. So if you want to use either the sort or the sorted function, you need to make sure that the data that you have is of the same data type. If I try to use the sort and sorted function on these, it would not work. That's the reason I have a new list over here. So I'm just printing the sorted value over here. So that is 3, 4, 5, 12, and 45. And then I am going to sort 45. And then you can see that it has not affected the actual list. That's the reason I have it over here. So sorted does not change the actual value of the list. It just prints it accordingly. But if I use the sort function, it would actually change the value of the list. So if I have a sort and it uses a keyword which is reverse is equal to true. If the reverse is equal to true, it will sort it in the descending order. If the reverse is equal to false, it will sort it in the ascending order. So that is what is happening here. So this is in the descending order right now. And then I just reverse it using the dot reverse function. So the data will now be reversed, which is basically now in the ascending order. And then I have the dot copy function, which is used to copy a list into another list. So it is mylist.copy into the new list. So if I have printed the new list, you can see I have the data of my list. So that basically wraps up list operations. I hope all of you are clear with it. So let's move ahead with the next data type. Let me just close this up. So the next data type that we have are tuples. What are tuples? Tuples are basically the same as lists with one exception, that they are not mutable, meaning that you cannot change the data in tuples. This makes tuples much more faster than lists. So how are tuples written? They are written using the parentheses. So let's move ahead directly to our tutorial. Let me run this. So as you can see, I have either the parenthesis or the tuple function, and it is the same over here also. If you want to initialize the data, you will have to send it as a single variable in the tuple function, whereas you can use commas in the parentheses. You can see here we have empty lists. Let me go ahead, comment this out, and let me uncomment all of this. Where would you use empty tuples? It would be cases where you do not know what exactly data has to be sent into the tuple. So what do you do over here? You can just concatenate data into it. So for example, my tuple equal to my tuple plus 1, 2, 3. Let me print my tuple over here. Let me go ahead and run this. So as you can see, I have 1, 2, 3 in the tuple. This was because I did not know what do I need to add in my tuple in the previous example. But as soon as I kept doing some sort of operations, I was able to understand what data I need to add. And that's the reason I concatenated it using the tuple. But now if I try to change my tuple's data, as you can see, that statement seems to have no effect, meaning that the tuple will not have any sort of changement, or it cannot be mutated. So that's the reason you may want to have some sort of, empty tuple, which you may later be populating. So that may be one reason where you want to use empty tuples, where you do not know what data you need to have, but slowly you can populate it accordingly. This is basically how you initialize your elements in the tuple. Let me go ahead and run this. So as you can see, I have 1, 2, 3 and tuple, and all of this is sent to it as a single element. So that is what is happening over here. Now, there is one thing that you always need to remember. When you want to have a tuple with a single element, make sure that it is always with a comma at the end. Why is this important? Is because if I remove the comma and I show you the type that is my tuple 3, it is now a string data. So that is the reason a comma is needed, so that you can have a tuple with a single element. So I hope you have understood how do you initialize the data. The accessing of elements is the same way as you do it with the lists. So let me go ahead and run this. As you can see, 1, 2, 3 Python and accordingly. So the 0th element of my tuple is 1 over here, and I want to print everything. So Python for Eureka is printed. And then I have the third element, which is a list over here, and I want to print the element which is at index number 1, that is Python. This is how I access the elements. You can actually change the data in a tuple if the data you are trying to change is mutable. So here I have 1, 2, 3, Hindi and Python. Now you know that this is a list, and a list is basically mutable, right? So I can change the data in this particular list, but I cannot change the whole list. Why? It's because it is a part of the tuple. So I'm just saying go to the list index and then change the 0th element, that is Hindi, change it to English. So if I print this, I have 1, 2, 3 English and Python over here. So that is one way you can actually change the data of a tuple. And we have just a few more methods, which are the count method and the index method, which is the same as how it works in lists. So the count of 2 is actually just 1, and the index of Hindi and Python is 3. So I have 1 and 3 as the output. So that